Welcome to Rocketship, the home of epic React Native content. I'm Simon Grimm, creator of Galaxies.dev, and today's guest is someone who was already on the show. Welcome again, Evan Bacon.
Hey Simon, yeah, thanks for having me again.
You were on the podcast at episode 28, and that was one of the most, if not actually the most popular episodes. So sets the bar kind of high for today.
Well, yeah, so we can live up to that.
We want to dive into a lot of topics today. I actually have a long list. I don't know if we can get through all of this because there's a lot of exciting packages you worked on. We got Expo Router, we got DOM components, we got RSC in developer preview. There's something new about hosting that I just read about today. You talked a lot actually about Expo Apple targets and widgets lately. So a lot to talk about and a lot to cover. But first, could you quickly introduce yourself for everyone who haven't came across your name? But I don't know. Can you do React Native and haven't heard about Evan Bacon? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably plenty of people. I'm Evan Bacon. I'm the manager of DevTools at Expo, and I write a lot of code. Work on all the things that Simon just said. So like Expo Router, DOM components, the bundler, and just really whatever it takes to make great universal apps. And I also manage the web team and the web platform at Expo.
That's quite a lot, yeah. What's currently your main focus at Expo? Do you have one, or do you work on 5 different projects all the time?
So my main focus this week is server components, the new hosting service that we'll talk about, and web, but then I guess also CLI and some of the routers stuff. So yeah, I mean basically all those stuff. But we have an incredible team at Expo, so it's pretty easy to delegate out these tasks between Cedric and Phil Pluckton.
Yeah, it's still amazing. Your team is still pretty small, but you pump out so many new features and cool additions all the time. I don't know. What are you like? Are you even 50 people at all?
I think the entire Expo team, maybe it's about 30, 35 people.
Yeah.
But then my team is, specifically those 3 people. And then, part-time from other members of the SDK team, like Kudo Chen and Caddy Kramer.
So, right.
Yeah.
And for everyone, I also listened to your episode you recently did on the Callstack podcast. Is it React Universe now, the podcast name? I don't know, but that episode is definitely also worth listening for everyone. You went into a lot of details there as well. We're going to see if we can also talk about a couple of other topics. Let's dive straight into Expo Router. Let's first of all set the landscape and talk about the state of Expo Router. It's been out for quite long. We talked about it last year. How happy are you in general with the progress and adoption of Expo Router in React Native land?
Yeah, I'm extremely happy with how Expo Router has turned out. The goal from when I started Expo Router was to get to this part where we have server components and people can build server-driven UI, because I just saw so many big companies talking about how we built Netflix, or we built this thing at Apple, and we were able to do it because we have server-driven UI, and it's totally unobtainable for indie developers. And it's clear that we're getting to a place where anyone can spin up an app and build something like that. So then it's just whoever has the best idea for how to use that wins. And we're getting there very quickly. So I'm very happy that Expo Router has been really well received in just the native world, and that file-based routing works on native. But then also that it's worked pretty well for building universal and building stuff that works on web and native pretty well. And that some of these rendering patterns are working well on native. But I think the real magic will come when we enable server functions and server components for just kind of maybe by some sort of default in some capacity, and see how people use that. Because then you can do so many composable server concepts, which right now are just these one-off projects. So you could think about authentication. You could just drop in a component which has all of the server and client and native elements of authentication, or anything with AI. An example of this is I've been working on this AI app, and when you query movies, it will show you a list of movies. And then I wanted it when you clicked on a movie to just open a modal and then have all of the info about the movie. And then you can click on more pages to go to more movie. And basically just a mini app inside of my AI app that was all the movie stuff. And I was able to lift that out of my like a different movies app and then just paste all of that in because it has all the composability of React for the server and the client. So all the endpoints, all the secrets like represented. So you can then just move and port these
Wow.
pieces around. It feels truly magical. So I'm very happy with how Expo Router has like been adopted so far, but I'm extremely excited for people to try all the new stuff that we have coming up.
Yeah, we're going to get to RSC. I know that people had some sort of objections. I sometimes posted about RSCs and get some like negative feedback, but we're going to get to that in a second. But for the moment, let's focus also stay for with Expo Router a bit
Yeah.
more. Do you have like numbers about the general adoption? I mean, a lot of people still use React navigation because of like legacy applications. Maybe they also don't want to learn something new, or they also don't see the real value of Expo Router and say, "Hey, I will just use React navigation." Do you have numbers like what's the percentage in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, since it's like completely open source and free, we don't have like real tracking metrics for that. So you can look at the npm numbers to see. I guess a few data points here. One is that we have Expo Router enabled by default. It's built on top of React Navigation, which we also
Yeah,
worked on.
sure.
But yeah, it's just a much better way to get started. So yeah, and then also Expo Router has historically, at least these first few versions, been targeted at just new greenfield projects that are have all these newer concepts that
Right.
people weren't thinking about when they built their original app. And so it's going to be things like deep linking by default, universal linking, and like serialized props. And so in the future, we'll add features like rewrites and redirects, which will make it much easier to take an existing structure, some sort of brownfield project, and migrate over to Expo Router. But for right now, it's mostly the newer projects, and so we're seeing like really great adoption, all things considered, for that. I looked up. I mean, it's hard to query the App Store lately, but I was able to query some of the trending, and I saw there were a bunch of new apps in the App Store using Expo Router, like in the trending list. So yeah, I mean, I think what we aren't seeing is we aren't seeing a lot of people using Expo Router and then like moving off of it. So it's kind of like a one-way street, and then it's just a matter of like how often people are making new
Yeah,
apps.
I think this
And
only
again, it
happens.
is easy to move off of it. It's because it is built on top of React Navigation, so you can drop down
Right.
to React Navigation if you want.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem people usually encounter is when they have like nested structures and then they have they nested layouts and they just can't wrap their head around where do my tabs go, where's the third drawer in the fourth tab navigation, and then it gets a bit
Mhm.
ugly. But
Yeah, and we
overall,
can improve that as well. Like we can, I think what we need to do is make the navigators just do more things. So for example, like React Navigation 7 with React Native Screens, you can now do like bottom sheets with the stack navigator. Whereas before you would have to like set up a custom bottom stack navigator with a new
yeah,
layout. And now it's like this more nested structure. So if we could do that where it's like you can maybe add tabs and drawers and whatever you want inside of any layout, now you can have much more simplified layouts. I mean, because like
yeah.
unlike web structures, like these native apps do have a lot of gestures and transitions between screens. So this is something that's pretty new.
I'd honestly kiss your feet if you can do this because it was such a pain. Like all the time, I set up a tab bar and I'm like, of course I want to have a stack on that first tab. It just has to be a stack, and then you have to do drop down into another layout file and a new stack. And yeah, if you
Yeah,
can improve
I
that,
think the
that would be
opposite
cool.
side of that coin would just be like having the UI elements, like the headless UI elements, so that you can just do like a modal without needing it to be part of the routing system, right? Just drop in
Right.
something that just works. And we're going to do a bunch more of those as well, partially just because yeah, it solves this problem, but also because these declarative elements that sit outside the router work better with server rendering. Um,
All
so
right. So, I mean, you're of course extremely biased because you're the creator of Expo Router, but do you still see a use case for people when they start a new app to say, hey, just use React Navigation? And I know React Navigation is used under the hood of Expo Router, but it is essentially still different. Like you have either the concept of file-based routing or like setting up the screens and how you do it with React Navigation.
yeah, I mean, when you build an app with Expo Router, if you like start making custom layouts, you are working directly with React Navigation, and then you're with a lot of the time React Native Screens. So I don't think it feels too foreign for people to work with these. I do think it's like use the right tool for the job. React Navigation is really fantastic, especially with this like when you start to get into more of those nitty gritty pieces. But then when you're just thinking about like, okay, I need to like declare 52 screens or something, I need them all like linkable and ready, then Expo Router is, you just like drop the page in. So I like that you kind of have this gradient of complexity. For the simple things, you can just drop a file in, but when you need to go more complex, you can really drop down to the incremental layers. And I love for that gradient to have like a lot more on the like the opposite side, like the harder side, where you can, really get in and build custom native navigators if you want. Because I just tweeted about this, like, what did people find hardest to build? And the majority of it was like different stack treatments and stack navigation, which isn't like exclusive to React Native at all. Like in the Swift community, this is a big topic as well. Like people are always trying to find new and interesting ways to use the UI navigation controller. There's a bunch of private APIs because like Apple's different API, like Apple's different stock apps have different treatments in the native navigation headers, and you can only access those through private APIs. So there's like a whole community around how you.
I see.
So I would love if the Expo community could also be part of that community and like access those private APIs, maybe some, like because that's just part of how things work right now.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah, it would be really wild. I mean, they're already bringing Swift UI to Expo as well, to React Native. Why not everything?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a huge theme this in like 2025 is going to be just adding more Swift UI and Material 3 and, using all the latest modern native components because one app's to look good.
So we are at Expo Router version 4, right?
Yeah.
As far as I know. The last time we talked, you had the big plan of if we get to Expo Router version 4, we're kind of done with the story. We have everything in place. And I think you also said like we will rename it at that point, which I wasn't sure about. So what are the current plans about that?
Yeah. So the plan was first version was just prove out file-based routing works, then add static route rendering, do a lot of web stuff in V2, and then in V3 add API routes, and in V4 add server components. And so V4 we have the developer preview for server components. Server components is like really gnarly, and we had a lot of developer feedback about it, just from how it works on the web. And so we kind of rolled out like 2 versions of server, where you have like the early version where it's just server functions and you can call into them, but the rest of the app is still client. And then there's the more complex server components version, which will require a larger rewrite of React navigation to get fully working. And then, to get server components enabled, we needed to enable new architecture, and we needed to like ship, custom canary build of React 19. So we were able to kind of like squeeze, just enough to get like part of server components into V4. And so V5 was actually where I planned to add DOM components, but we were able to get that out like much quicker because a lot of it shared code with server components. So yeah, I think in some ways we're a little ahead of schedule, and in other ways there's still like some work to be done. But yeah, I'm really excited with all the tools they're out, and really like our goal is going to be just take all of these things and make them like coherent and work and very solid, and then get them enabled, and then people will have like a great foundation to start building new libraries on, right? Like you can build new composable server libraries or libraries that use DOM components and ship those, and people can like so you could have like charting libraries or rich text editing libraries or so yeah, it just basically all the pieces are out now, and I don't think there'll be too much more radical change. There will be smaller improvements, like improvements to tree shaking and things like rewrites and redirects, but yeah, no more I think world shattering features for at least a few more months. And then for the rename, we have the name picked out, name secured. We are very excited by it. Yeah, so that'll still happen. It's just a matter of timing for that one. Like it's not too technically challenging to rename it.
Sure.
But yeah, in like
it's not technically challenging for you, but for me, with like 20 videos that are all called Expo Router, Expo Router.
Yeah, I know. It'll be a big change, but I think we kind of want that to align with when the paradigm shift really happens, and it's like these, people will think about this new name version of Expo Router as less like streamlined React navigation and more like universal apps. Great for building websites, great for building native apps. From a universal code base, works on the server, no limitations really. So like right now, when you hear about Expo Router, you're like, that's a native tool. Do I really want to build a website with a native tool? Like, is that going to support all the web features I need? Um, and so in the future, this new tool will have that universal alignment, and that's really kind of what we're going for with that.
That's good because I wanted to ask you anyway regarding Expo for Web because you just brought up the
Mm-hmm.
topic of universal applications. Are you currently like recommending Expo for Web? What is the state of it? It's like everyone's like, yeah, you can do it. I mean, your blog is a great showcase of like doing it in a good way, but are you still like limited? You probably wouldn't use it for something where you would use Next.js. And I think at one point you said Expo Web will be separated from the core native platform. I think, though, I think I'm quoting you. At least maybe I picked it up somewhere.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on Expo Web right now at this
I
point?
mean, yeah, Expo Web is great. It's fantastic. I think some of the challenges that Expo Web had was getting, because with Expo Web you can just write like DOM code in it, and you can use CSS, you Tailwind,
Yeah.
CSS modules. It now has, like, since the last time we spoke, we've added tree shaking, we've improved bundle splitting. So it has a lot of really complex modern features inside of it. Um, and and API routes, environment variables, like so many of the things you want. The list of things that it doesn't have is pretty short, and we're just like chipping away at those, and there's only so many to add. So actually, I think the main things that it doesn't have are like a really nice opinionated way to do a lot of the server rendering elements. And as with each of these features, the problem was always that native couldn't keep up. So like with the original Expo Web, when I wrote it like 6 or 7 years ago, it had no file-based routing, right? So it's like if you were to switch from some modern framework to Expo Web, you now give up file-based routing because there was no way to do that on native. So we built Expo Router, and now you can do that on native, so you don't give that up. And so like right now, it doesn't have server rendering because there's no way to do that on native. But with server components, you now have a way to do that on all platforms. And server components also enable build time static rendering. We have a version of that already, just because we were able to kind of do some funny magic with that to get it working. But yeah, so I think we'll have essentially every core element, and some things don't need to appeal to this like lowest common denominator approach of like, well, it doesn't work on native, so you can't do it on web. It's really just like the foundational features that you need to be working everywhere. So that's going to be like your routing, the entire structure of your app,
Yeah, of course.
the way data flows through your app, and probably things like authentication as well. So figuring out like how those pieces work everywhere is key. And yeah, we've done most of that. So I use Expo Web for everything. At Expo, we are dogfooding it, so all of our new web projects we're building out using Expo Web.
What is the Expo website built with?
Expo website, it's like some quasi React. It's transitioned through lots of different React frameworks over the years. But yeah, the Expo blog part of the website, like the new part, is all Expo Router.
Cool.
And yeah, so like as we're building out new things, we're just using Expo as much as possible, which is great because then it gets much better. It's a tight feedback loop, and we add features that we otherwise wouldn't think are important. But then there's also I mean, like the Blue Sky website, for example, is written with Expo, and there's a couple of food websites written. I think like Popeyes is written with Expo
Really?
Web. Yeah, and then
Yeah, you should make a list of those as well. I think that would be cool.
might be Burger King as well with
Oh,
Expo.
really?
Yeah, so there's a ton of like huge Expo websites out there.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is becoming a clear winner in areas where like you have an app and a website, and your app is like most important. Right. So like in all of these food commerce situations, the majority of commerce moves through the app. And then in places where it's like you have a website, but you aren't sure if it could even be an app, those are the areas where we need to improve, right? So there's going to be a lot of things around like the static and server rendering, which we are getting into. And yeah, I mean, it's just like there's so many web frameworks. It's not like the hardest possible thing to build a web framework. And so what we really want to do, I mean, it's still very difficult, but it's not like impossible. So what we really want to do is just help people reuse the code that they make. So if you write some code, you shouldn't be blocked and feel like you have to rewrite it with a new tool in order to ship to users, because you should really just be able to zoom out and think about like, what problem are you solving in the world, and has the code maximize the code that you've written to solve that problem.
Yeah, you're really driven by like making shipping apps easier, I think, and not just like specific technical pieces, but like the whole picture of I want to help people build stuff easily. Like, I mean, that's the end goal of building an app. I don't build
Right.
this for like I built this so somebody in the world will use it and like laugh or cry or chat with friends or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of it can be a little disheartening to like build something, like really pour your heart out, and then it's like you can't get it onto the device that you of whoever you want it to be on, right? Like that.
Right.
Yeah. It's a little devastating, to be honest. And so I would love to be in a world where that just never happens. And if you build something with Expo, you can feel confident that you can get what you wrote onto someone's phone or their computer, like, and that will definitely happen, and it will happen as soon as possible.
So you previously said when the app is more important and the website is an afterthought, Expo is perfect because you get a perfect app, and with Expo Web you can also kind of do the website. You said it's a bit more challenging the opposite way, and you last year released something that made going from the web to native a whole lot easier, which is Expo DOM components. So, like the easy picture from my point of view is you can bring in HTML code and kind of display it in a web view. So that was also some of the initial comments, which were like,
Yeah.
"Isn't Expo DOM components just a glorified web view?"
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's basically that. I mean, well, so there's definitely a lot of nuance here compared to like other WebView approaches. I know you're like probably the foremost expert in WebView based technologies. Um, but there's definitely I think DOM components are like fantastic. One thing that really makes them great is the way that you don't do navigation inside of them. So with a DOM component, we try to enforce that it's just a component. It's not like it doesn't have routing built into it. It doesn't have like now you don't switching between pages inside of that web view. And so, for instance, when you do things like navigate with Expo Router link, it sends that like invocation up to Expo Router, and then it performs a native navigation event.
That works at this point, right? If I have like a
Yeah,
link
that's
in
in
the
there today. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And that's really important because I think navigation does a lot of the heavy lifting for making your app look and feel like a native application. There's so many like optimizations built into the operating system around like UI view controller and Android's like fragment system. And you just lose out on so many of those if you're using a web view for navigation. And then, the other element here is that it's like DOM components are this I mean, they're fantastic because it's just all these pieces coming together, right? So you have like Expo Web, Expo Native, and then this the fact that like with things like Hermes, you can write JavaScript and then build like a full powered native app with that. And so because the language that you're writing in, like JavaScript works on both the web view side and the web side, and React works on both the web view side and the web side and the native side, you have the ability to just delete the directive and switch between web view and native. So this is a problem with previous like WebView approaches is that if you wanted to switch to native, you kind of had to like start over, or you had to build like some native component and then like maybe float that over the con. It's like really tricky to get that migration right. And so with DOM components, you have this really fine-grained incremental migration story from truly web to universal and fully native, and that has so many trickle like. I'm really flustered talking about this. There's so many elements to talk about here. That has all these other benefits, like just being able to see like in which places is web a little bit better, or in which places do the styles like yoga not align with CSS styles. For instance, you could have a React Native web view, like you could have a React Native web view, like from React Native, and then if you were to do some styles, then you could just delete the use DOM at the top, and that switches over to native immediately. And you can see in like which places do maybe like flex grow work differently or flex shrink. It's kind of hard to do that when it's like on two different form factors, right? And there's this entire different like bundling stack, this whole different set of like there's so many globals involved with styling that could get in the way. And with DOM components, you can just do that like instant comparison. So it's just part of this gradient of migration that we want to create, where we meet the users where they are. So it's like if you are someone who wanted to like quickly move and build like a website to test your idea where you're fetching some data, you shouldn't have to like be penalized and have to start over from doing that. You should be able to just deploy it instantly to the App Store and then migrate over as you see fit. Or, as you want to increase the quality of the app. Because there's a lot of like I built my my portfolio the other day, and I migrated it to like Expo through DOM components. And like when I built the portfolio, it was by no means meant to be native. So I was using just div, span, p, like all the web components, a bunch of Tailwind, and just like a lot of. I wanted it to be like a full-fledged website, like see how far Expo Web could go, and it was like unclear if I made it a native app, if that would even make sense, like to have a portfolio native app. So I was able to get this working in like less than an hour. And I got it to a point where like
Wow.
through this migration, I was like, oh, you know what this does? I can see like a bunch of areas where this would be actually a really nice native app. And in doing that, I was basically able to like sell myself on the idea of making an app
Oh yeah.
from this website. So I think that's like a really magical, feeling that you get out of this incremental system.
It gives you like this initial boost, right? You see that it's possible to go native.
Yeah, you can like find, I think it's great to have a tool that helps you find product market fit, or just like helps sell you on, like get that foothold in. Because I think Expo is really fantastic. Building native apps are fantastic, but a lot of people maybe don't identify as like a native developer. Maybe they think they just aren't capable of doing native development. And so to be able to, get that foothold and be like, you know what, this isn't so hard. And then you just start writing native code like a madman, because you're like, I can definitely do this. I think there's just so many elements of DOM components that are fantastic. And, we're also seeing people like get unblocked in really unique ways that they weren't really raising before to us publicly. So, there's projects where maybe you have like some complex D3 visualization, and that's central to your website. And then you go to build an app and you're like, okay, but we're still actively developing the D3 part on the website, and there is no D3 on native.
Right.
How do we have to re-implement the whole charting library as well as our chart? And now you could be like, we'll just pull DOM that one component in, render it, and then ship it to the store. So you have this ability to like not have to stop with one platform and keep the velocity up. Yeah, I can go on for days.
I know you're super excited about DOM components. I mean, I like them as well. And by the way, for everyone out there, don't be afraid to build native apps. I have built several apps in the past, and just yesterday, my new app was declined by Apple. And the reason was they couldn't close the introduction slider. I had to, I positioned the button outside of the view somehow. And, they tested on a small device, and I always did it on iPhone Pro. So don't be afraid. Just do your best. And
yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think there's some element here where when we announced DOM components, people were like, "Oh, so you guys are just building like web view stuff now?" It's like not necessarily. Yeah. This is very much a positive sum endeavor where. I think everyone who's already building universal code will keep building universal code. Like I still, build very native stuff all the time. Like I was saying earlier, I'm digging into like private headers in the UI navigation controller on Swift. But I think this will open the door for new developers who just thought that they maybe couldn't get into the space to join. And so I think we'll just see more and more people enter the space now that this is there, and then migrate over to native. So I'm extremely excited for that, because there's still a huge disparity between people who are building websites and people who are building native apps.
Yeah.
And if you really look at like how the internet's consumed, like the majority of web is consumed. I mean, like the web is primarily used on desktop platforms, and then on mobile platforms, primarily native. So I guess another way to think about this is like mostly people are building content for the desktop, and substantially fewer are building content for mobile devices. And it's like there's just so many more things you can do with your computer when you're moving it around and you're not sitting down with it. So yeah, I think we'll just see new opportunities, new products, and just be better.
I would also just recommend everyone give it a try, because it really works that easy. When I first tried it and just dropped some HTML in, and then I added like some Tailwind, and then added some like Tailwind UI components, and I just immediately had it in my native app. It really felt good. It felt different than using something like Capacitor. I know with Capacitor you can wrap like your whole Angular or React app, and it runs in the web view, but that's still a very different story to what Expo DOM components are doing. Let's move on to RSC because there are so many interesting things. I think we could probably talk an hour about DOM components alone, but I'm also already working on a video that should hopefully come out soon for the transition. So let's for the moment focus on RSC. This kind of felt like a bigger step because DOM components kind of existed. Like everyone said, we do already have the web view, but that you made RSC work with React Native was kind of like unheard of, and you dropped this epic AI demo where like AI wrote your component and streamed it back at the conference. Yeah. That one was really wild. So at this point, how ready are RSCs in React Native and Expo?
Yeah, so as of today, RSC is in developer preview, which is like a new term we're using for before beta, but external. And the purpose of the developer preview is that there's just so many libraries that need to go in and add the use client directives, here and there. And we want to, help people get ready, help people make, like resources and wrap their minds around it. And then just give a lot of feedback. And the main thing that makes it a developer preview is that you cannot deploy it to production right now. But that I expect that to change, pretty soon with the release of EAS hosting. Just because, they're like when you build the RSC renderer, unlike API routes, for example, you can have platform specific components. So when we bundle it, we need to bundle those platform specific components in like a platform specific server bundle. So you kind of have like a dimension of platforms rather than an array of them. So instead of like iOS, Android, Web, you have like iOS, Android, Web, and then the dimension of like server iOS, server Android, server Web. And then that gives you the ability to do things like, do like if platform is equal to iOS, do this server functionality. And if it's Android, do this server functionality. And then we wire that all up behind the scenes so that you can, invoke. And if a server action is invoked from like Android, then to use the Android server. So it's still very early, but I highly recommend people check it out. Like it's early, but even in its earliest state, I was able to build this AI demo that you were talking about. And like that was like one of the coolest apps that I'd ever used at the time. It's still like, pretty unparalleled. Like I think the way a lot of these other AI apps work is they send down JSON and then they just query the JSON locally and then they render some predetermined component. But like what you were saying, you're able to do things like just render components in the server like arbitrarily. That will not be ready in probably for a while. Like, because that you need to like. Actually, I guess you could make that work maybe with something like Snackager, like what we use to make Snack work, because that bundles in the cloud. So the way I got that working locally was it just connects to Metro locally. So we take the source from ChatGPT, and then in the server component we like pass that to Metro, and then we bundle it, and then we like pass the bundled string down to the client and evaluates it and renders it. So you could do that in the server, I guess. You would just need like to set up something like Snackager. But then like that's crazy, right? Like that absolutely. You could query an AI thing and be like, hey, I want something that's doesn't exist, and then it would just write it and then render it for you. Like it's absurd. And this will be a tool that everyone can use. I'm submitting this blank app to Apple here. It can do everything. no, not for that purpose. What I found about the App Store view is that they really they don't really ban features so much as they ban like intentions, like your intent, right? Like they don't ban the payments feature, but they do ban the intent of like using it to sell illicit goods. And so like they don't ban like OTA features, but they do ban the intent of like circumventing store review and trying to ship something like malicious. Because you could do that like today with a web view if you wanted. You could just put a web view in, then change the source URL. Like the most harmful things you could do on the phone is just with like view image and text. Like you don't need like high quality rendering with like fine gestures and animations. This is definitely more for like, I don't know, if you were trying to like flight search and you could like generate all the AI components for like that specific flight search to like have the most optimal UI streamed down to a mobile form factor. Like crazy stuff.
So when I shared something about RSCs a couple of months ago, I was super excited about that we could finally use it, and I found it really crazy to use it. But like 90% of the replies were like, nah, why do we need this? I see no use case. I will not adopt this. I don't know why we need this. Nah, I have never used it before,
Yeah.
but no, don't think so. So, why do you think people are so skeptical of this? And do you think this will change over time? What do you see like? Because some people said, yeah, this is cool for like banking applications where you have security and that stuff. But as you
Yeah.
say, it sounds more like in 2 or 3 years, this will be the default in Expo apps and everyone's going to use it.
Uh, I think I don't. I won't have to make it the default. I think people will request it's the default in the same way that people requested Expo Router as the default, and a lot of people are requesting that right now for like native wind and like Tailwind based solutions. And people did that for like reanimated. You know, I don't have like some fun quippy line, but I do think like people were very skeptical of like React when it first came out. They were like, "Why would we need this? This will only be useful for like like weird types of applications." But it's like there's a lot of AI apps now. Like AI is definitely like and you need to go to the server for a lot of that. Um, people are leaking secrets all over the place, and that
Yeah.
is going to be like more problematic in the future. Like because it'll just be easier to access them. And query for them. Like you could just take like a minified any sort of bundle and pass it to like AI, and it can like tell you where all the key points of that bundle are. Like that was not something a while ago. So you'll need stuff like that, but that's also kind of on the fear mongering side. I think there's a lot on like the more fun side, where yeah, like I just in my own personal usage, I'm using server components, server actions for basically everything now, and I love it. It's really less about like you mentioned this concept of like banking apps. It's more about like components inside of your app, and it's like so many components are just those one or two or three or the entire thing that do require some network connection. And it's really nice to have this unified language for communicating across that like server client boundary in a way that is expressed in React components. So we were talking about this a little bit before, but it's like when you use API routes, for example, if you get like a server error, the way it returns an error is it will give you like a status code, but then it'll also give you some HTML. With a server action, it can like throw up to an error boundary, and then you can express that error in React components. So like that is a universal. It's like all of like the entire language of like you communicate over typed props, you return serialized type props. When it throws an error that can be understood by React components. So the entire language can be understood on both sides of the aisle. Um, and just like the fine grained interactivity is great too. Like if we think about OTA updates and how fantastic those are, it is one giant opaque bundle. And it's nice to build your app in such a way where you say like, all right, now this one will show this loading state while we fetch the freshest data, or while we fetch, like current data and fetch freshest data in the background. And if it fails, then we use this React component to show that failure state. It's much more declarative like that, and it's more intentful.
I think you touched on this topic on the Call Stack podcast as well. I wanted to question like RSC versus OTA. Could you give like a clear when to use what? Because in the future we're gonna have access to both in like a couple of months. So when would I use OTA and when would I rather use RSC?
Yeah, well, so RSC gives you the ability to run some JavaScript that's not currently on the client, and then it also has the ability to split the bundle and then return certain bundles that aren't on the client currently. So for content that you want to be like fresh, like all the like you want it to be the latest data. So this is going to be things like if you just updated like your database and now you want your component to reflect that database. You shouldn't use an OTA update for that because you don't want to like restart the app and go back to that same page to see the database update. And there's actually a number of things like that people use OTA for today. So I think they're like overloading OTA. It'll be things like maybe a title that comes down in a card that comes with the rest of like that only shows up when your profile loads, right? So now you can render the treatment of data next to that data fetch request. So for instance, maybe if you had like a typo on the profile page, it's like now that profile page would actually be server rendered when you fetch the profile data because you have secrets that you're dealing with when interacting with your data. So that part probably moves more into the server side. But then OTA is fantastic because it has this stale while revalidating caching policy. So you have this ability to make the app feel like it just doesn't have any network request at all, because it'll be like fetching in the background. It will try loading in the background. And if it fails, then it will abandon that bundle, and then it'll like, update the server, so you can see from the dashboard if it doesn't work. And so it has more of this like opaque control policy, whereas RSC will be more of like a free for all and fine grain control policy. And then like the other thing is like OTA works today, so you can use it today, you can use it for a long time. RSC, there's still a lot of questions about just getting it like working and getting all the features in, and then there will be another set of questions about the caching policy and how you control the caching of each individual component and fetching of data.
Right. I think you mentioned this before somewhere as well. I heard you say the word use cache. I know we got use client and we got use DOM. Does use cache already exist, or will it come to RSC soon?
Yeah, so that's like a new feature that the React team has been working on. And it like memoizes a function scope essentially. So yeah, that will be in there eventually. And it's, it's neat. Like I don't want to like get too into the weeds on it, because I guess it will sound very scary, which is why the way we're rolling out RSC is like, very incrementally. So we have this pretty novel approach to RSC right now, where you can do this server functions only mode. So you can have the entire app be client and then just have like one server function in it. And then you can like, the app doesn't require any deployment or anything, because if you call that server function and it's not deployed, it will just fail because it can't connect to the server, right? But like the rest of your app still works. So you don't have to do some like massive rewrite or refactor to try it. And then from that server action, you can do things like return React components, and those are server components. Like they'll stream down and render in your app. And my hope here is that will like show people how this works. They'll give them an understanding of like why you might want to move more code over to the server, or why you might want to keep it on the client. But then also you'll see things like, you'll call a server action and then it doesn't have any data fetching requests, and it could probably just be done at build time, right? Like maybe you render, for example, like, maybe you have, this is kind of a niche example, but maybe you have like a licenses page in your app, and that licenses component just reads off the file system. And like you can do that with a server component, because when it runs locally, it runs on your computer. And so like when you deploy that app, that component won't work anymore because it's deployed to a server and it's not running on your file system. It doesn't have the node modules to read. So you'll want something like the full server component support, so that we can automatically cache that call at build time, and then just have like the RSC representation in your bundle, and then take all that Node.js code from your local computer and just leave it behind. And so like my plan here with this incremental rollout is to help people like see and understand why these features are important, but also like, plan it out so we can roll it out as soon as possible. So I think like with use cache, similarly, people will be able to do all this server action stuff, and they'll be like, okay, but like, is there any way that I can like have more fine grained control over the caching of this? Because I just don't want it to keep being invoked. And then we can add use cache and be like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted. So I guess like give people the features as they're requesting it, rather than being like, hey, here's something that you didn't ask for.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think this sounds really exciting. I don't know if this could potentially also work with like, I'm querying my CMS like only once at build time, and then it's kind of baked into the RSC or my application. Could this potentially work in the future?
Yeah, that definitely is something that could work. It partially works today in the developer preview. Like you can kind of play with it now, where if you turn on this super experimental flag, so there's the normal experimental, but then there's like so both of those modes that I described, both of them are available. Because I built the full version first, and then I built the more incremental version second, so that it was just based on developer feedback. And yeah, you can kind of play with this. So what it will do is it will default to turning all the server component routes into like API routes, server functions, which then get invoked again as you navigate to them. And then you can export a constant which says like run this only at build time. And so then at build time, it will like just run it, turn it into RSC, embed it, and then it will like leave that server action out of the bundle, which will mean that you could basically go to a place where you have less server inside of your app. because if before you had to fetch something, now you just do it once instead of all of your users doing it whenever they make the request. And again, this is like if you had to take that caching policy and apply it app wide, it wouldn't make any sense. So it's fantastic that we can do it on a function and component basis, because your needs change based on what you're calling into. And then server providers, like if you have like a service that does like some CMS, you could provide an Expo component, which then has all this content inside of it. And all you have to do is just like register your component, put the environment variable in, drop it in, maybe do some configuration.
Yeah, that would actually be pretty wild at one point. I like it. Yeah, I like RSCs. I gave it a try. I really like it. I'm excited to see what's coming next. And part of the problem that it's currently developer preview is that you can't really host it somewhere. And this is where the next part comes in. I just got a document, I think yesterday, from Dan. And you're going to roll this out on Tuesday. So when this episode goes live, it was probably a week ago or something. EAS hosting. You hinted at this, I think, before, because at the last FJS, you said, yeah, we need something to host those RSC bundles. What is EAS hosting? What can we do with it?
So we're super excited about EAS hosting. It's very similar to how EAS updates works, where you deploy part of your code to a host and then the app will download it. But this is more generalized. So it can be used for websites, and it can be used for API routes and server components. And then also just assets in your public folder. So you could now, like if you were working with assets in the public folder, deploy all that to EAS hosting and then keep those assets working in production, which is great because that's just one more way that you can reduce like binary and bundle size. One of the biggest ways that like bundles get too big is that they just bundle all these massive assets, which get resized.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, but maybe a lot of these assets live on some page that most users never load, right? So now you can defer those invocations. And that's just like more flexibility. And yeah, we also, like as I was mentioning, there's these platform specific server components. So those require like platform specific invocations with platform specific headers and linking. There's also, this isn't in this current, because it's currently in beta, but there's, a big question about versioning, because I mean, like the deployment of a server driven native app is challenging. The deployment of any native app is challenging, but it gets a little bit harder with the server as well. Because you build the app, you bundle the JavaScript, you also need to bundle the server, you need to deploy the server, and then link that server deployment to the build. And of course, there's all the code signing and everything else that you have to do, all the validation, then you send it off. And then you want to keep that deployment working, because people can have different versions of your app. Like unlike the browser, where the browser is always backwards compatible and always works with any version of any host, with a React Native app, you can totally change the native runtime, totally change what's available to JavaScript, and now it won't work with that version of that host. So traditional web hosting services, which just focus on websites only, are able to build around that assumption of the web browser, where it will always work, it's always backwards compatible. EAS hosting is built around the assumption that you have custom JavaScript runtimes, like custom browsers, which change however you want, whenever you want. And so we're able to build in like assertions for versioning, but we're also able to build in, just more like fine-grained error handling and better observability. So we can tell you, like, did this request come from like an iOS device or an Android device, or like this version of a build, and just give you like all the insights that you need to build server-driven UI. So we're pretty excited.
I gave it a quick try before we hopped on the recording, and it, honestly, it just worked. I created some API routes. I made my export. I ran the EAS deploy command. You got a test environment. You can like set up your subdomain, your production domain. I could see like the error logs exactly and the IDs of the requests. It looks really like a good, well thought out product that's almost finished. I think you don't really call it beta, or is it? It's like it's there.
It'll still be in beta, because there's, like I said, there's a lot of things that we want to do with it, and like to account for these like complex versioning situations and server components. But yeah, like for web, and as far as the web is concerned, it's pretty great. And this also gives people like the first taste of real like integrated observability in Expo. So you can get a sense for like server requests based on like location. You can also see just how many assets were requested, and you just get a sense for if your app is being used and how much it's being used. It's very, very light. It's not like a full analytics system, and it only works when there's a server connection. So if you want like those extra analytics, I would recommend using like a different analytics library.
Yeah, but I mean, if your app at some point is using a lot of RSCs, this could turn into some sort of analytics for your application. Maybe Expo Analytics in 2 years.
It doesn't even have to be Expo Analytics. You could just open this page, and if you're doing a lot of server stuff, you can see like parameters that are being used. You can see where a function throws, how an error was thrown. We also symbolicate the server error, so you can like get a sense for like where in your code something went wrong. And then you can like users can see like an ID that they can then share with you. So you can like go and look up that error. We also aggregate the errors so you can see which ones occur the most, and then like over a certain time span. Which is
so you're also becoming like the Sentry competitor.
No. Again, like those tools can do so many things that like this is just very specific to this type of deployment, and like very specific again to like just React errors that are being thrown inside of server components, because you just need that visibility as a baseline. Otherwise, this tool is very tricky to to interact with. And I'd also like add the way that we test this all is with an Express server. And all of this works locally inside of Expo CLI, which just uses a normal HTTP server. So you can use this to deploy and self-host if you want to go that direction. It's just the main thing that we're trying to do right now is proof out that all this works. As you mentioned, there's a lot of skepticism around these types of features and how well they'll work. And so we want to like just make it feel, very at home to someone who's not familiar with the inner complexities of complex server rendered applications in native projects. And like you said, it just works. That was like a key goal with the hosting service is take everything that's working in Expo CLI and just keep it working when you go to production. Like we're actively working on getting this all working in EAS build as well. So if you do EAS build and you have server functions enabled, then your app just keeps working the same way it did locally. You don't have to think about like, differences in the prod environment versus the dev environment.
Yeah, my first experience was definitely better than with RSC, because when I tried RSC, I was like, okay, I have to do this and that, and then I was stuck, and I asked you on X, and you're like, yeah, you have to install this React Canary version because for some reason you have to put this at the top, and I was like, that's really a developer preview.
That's definitely in dev preview. Hosting will be great. It'll be nice I think this will help us just move like API routes out of beta, and we can say this is just on. You can get it working. There's even like very niche things, like for instance, relative paths. When you make a fetch request, we can just turn that on by default now. Like actually, one thing that's kind of interesting here is, like when you develop a React Native app, you are developing against a server. You can at any time request content from the server, because that's just how apps like React Native apps work in development. So you'll notice this, whereas like if you're developing a React Native app, maybe you'll close your computer, go to a party, try to show someone, and it'll be like, can't connect to the server. That's like the maybe worst possible version of this. And then when we go to production, we package everything up and then we put it in the app so it just works standalone. With EAS hosting, we're able to basically keep your app working and any server feature stays working. Like for instance, the public assets works in development and then it fails when you go to production. We can keep that working all the way through to the server and into production. So I'm pretty excited about that, because one thing I would just love to see is for there to be as few differences as possible between dev and prod. Because in prod, you don't have like the same debugging tools. You don't have a network inspector. You don't have console logs. You can't open a log. So if things break there, it's very hard to track. So now with EAS hosting, you can go to the dashboard and you can see like if something went wrong. Only on the server side though. If you want the client side version of that, you got to set up Sentry. So we work with the Sentry team to add like first class, best possible support that we could. but yeah, I mean, really, we just want to keep this stuff working and get you to build like the best possible apps.
I think before this call, you said you don't really have like the story for it. I think this is the story. Show your Expo app at your next party without being embarrassed.
Yeah, I mean, I said I didn't have a concise story for this.
No, this is a good
yeah.
story. I already see the meme. They don't know, but I can run my Expo app.
Yeah, they don't even know I'm just using my own app in the corner. I think I'm on like the calculator app.
We also, I mean, there are a couple more things. By the way, one thing I noticed when, like, with hosting and server components, you're also, I mean, you probably don't want to do analytics and that stuff, but you could also easily do A/B tests. Then probably, like, I could have two different React server components, and I don't know. That would
One
be
thing I would
fancy.
love to see with this is for other people to build their own services on top of this. So, like, for instance, I mentioned the like auth story, and there's all these different like very opinionated ways to do auth. I would love to improve Expo auth session in the future by having server components so that you can do things, for instance, like the client secret, like token exchange. But the actual part where you like bring a database and then you like connect that database, that's right, like prime for someone building their own dashboard and having their own database and then like creating a service for that and then shipping like a component which then wraps around auth session, right? So there's just like so much room for different types of services that can compose and then like the interface for your entire SaaS product is a React component that you can drop in, and now it works on iOS, Android, web, and the server connects however you want. So that's why we're creating all these hooks for like environment variables and the composability and getting that deployment to work. We see this with like upload thing, for example, like Theo's product, where he was like, we wanted to do iOS and Android for a long time, but we just didn't want to like assume all the responsibility of figuring out how to like document deployment for all these different case scenarios. So when we added Expo API routes, they were like, here's how you use upload thing on iOS and Android. And then they were able to like keep focusing on building out like the best quality SaaS product, and then they don't have to worry about this deployment story. So yeah, like I think A/B test is another like prime example of a service that someone could build. A lot of things in like payments and commerce and rate limiting, like lots and lots and lots of different services could be built here.
Yeah, and as the last word about it, it also integrates nicely with workflow, which you I think announced in December. I saw you can like set up a step and then it just automatically builds. So it just ties nicely into what EAS and workflow can do already at this point. It just makes it more complete, I guess, in the future.
Yeah, definitely. It would be lovely to have a workflow where you can do the export and then deploy command, and then maybe set that up on some sort of cron, and then like rerun that whenever you have like data change from a CMS, maybe. So yeah, lots of opportunities here, lots of different techniques for just building new types of apps. I mean, like, yeah, there's just so many things that we don't consider about like the old React Native saying of like web the good parts, but like these things all exist on web, and this is why people can build so many different complex websites and ship them. It's like not anything to do with the platform. It's just that a lot of this tooling is missing from the space. So we're excited to deliver it. A lot of this has like very, very generous free tiers. So like let's say with the EAS hosting, that is a huge free tier. Because the idea there is really just like get these features to keep working, more so than like anything else. So yeah, really excited to see how people use this stuff.
Absolutely, me too. I'll do my best to do my usual part in your marketing.
Yeah, no, you do great. I love your videos; they're awesome.
Thanks. We're running a bit out of time. Before we get like to a quick outlook on what's coming in the year, I just wanted had one more topic on my list I wanted to quickly discuss with you. You've been sharing a lot about like Expo targets for Apple and Expo widgets lately. You have a huge interest in that stuff, and honestly, I think it's pretty cool because these are like things you're not sure actually how to do with React Native, like targeting Apple Watch or making a widget. What are you currently cooking?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love building native apps. It's just like something I've always been super interested in, and I love building things for like my phone because it's kind of like there's a bit of a symbiosis here, right? Where
Absolutely, yeah.
And so whatever I can do to like build personal technologies is fun. So all the Apple Target stuff is just something I built in my like spare time. It's a personal project, which is why it's also very much like iOS 18 only, and like targets the very niche type of device that I personally use. But yeah, this is a new tool where you can do like npx create target in your Expo app, and then you can pick any type of like Apple extension target. I think there's a few missing, but they're pretty straightforward to add.
I think you said like 16 or so. What are all those targets?
There's a lot. I haven't even used all of them myself. I mean, I have like a test which builds them all. One thing that makes it pretty nice is that there's a little like pre-build template in there. So I mean, this whole project sits on top of Expo CNG, right? Like the pre-build and config plugin system. And when we built that, the goal was to get people moved over from like the old Expo eject system onto
You said the
config
word.
plugins. Yeah, well, I deleted it. Yeah. So like to move people between these two without really noticing any difference. And that was a ton of work. It took a long time to build. So when I was done, I stopped like adding a bunch of new. I mean, I added a bunch of config plugins like detox and app icons and stuff. But there was all this other opportunity to basically build anything in the iOS space or the Android space as easy as you could do Expo apps. And so now I've been playing with that with Apple Target. So you can do npx create target, and then it will generate iOS code outside of the iOS folder, so that you're just like writing the 1 or 2 or 3 Swift files required to make that target. Because this isn't like a ton of code. It's not like a whole app, right? It's very much like a monorepo where you have sub apps that get embedded in your main iOS app. And then you can do things like make control widgets, which go on like your control center or on your home screen or your lock screen. You can make like, just really anything. You can make widgets. You can make custom keyboards with it. You can make Siri intents, app intents, share extensions. Like really, you can basically build whatever you want. And so that gets really into like niche content that you do to really push your app to the edge. But we can do really cool stuff with it. Like I wrote this control intent thing where given an SF symbol and a URL, you can like generate control widgets, which you can like put on the front of your lock screen or in your, like when you pull down the control center. And when you open them, then it launches whatever URL you have, which builds really nicely on Expo Router, where every route inside of your app is fully deep linkable, including query parameters. So we're able to like get the best of both worlds from these two pieces coming together.
So I don't want to dive too deep into this. I mean, I love it. I find this super exciting, and I would love to do more.
Me too.
Just like from a practical perspective, let's say I have an application that has some data in, let's say, SQLite or so internally. How long would it take me to like set up a little widget that on my home screen displays this data? Is it like a matter of with npx target like 30 minutes, or will I tinker on this like half a day? Because like you said, I just have to set up like 1 or 2 Swift files, and that's it.
Yeah.
How's the connection between like the Swift part and then like my SQLite data in the app? How do they communicate?
Yeah,
is there any sort of like interface?
So data communicates with widgets over NS user defaults. So inside of my Apple Targets library, there is like an Expo module where you can import, and then you can set data values, and then it communicates across apps with app groups. So EAS automatically, like this config plugin sets up the EAS for assigning the app groups. So that's just going to be like some string that you use across all your widgets. So you can import in your React Native code this module like app storage or extension storage, and then do like storage.set and then like a key value. And then on the Swift side, you have like some data loading Swift function, and then you just look for that key, and then you coerce the data out. I have like some examples which are good to look at, because I think that data coercion on the Swift side is maybe the gnarliest part, because there's things like the JS date format, including like milliseconds, which you then have to coerce a little differently on the iOS side.
And how would this work like to be more real time? I think you can also have like real time widgets on the home screen. I don't know what's the name, live activities, or that's something different.
I have that's a little bit different. I have a live activity demo inside of the Create Expo app, like whatever, inside of the App Targets project, so many names. I haven't tweeted about it yet, but that one uses something called app intents, which are a little funky. There's 2 ways that app intents work. One is you have to take and define this like Swift struct, and then that file has to be available in both targets. Or this is a weird hack, you can just copy that exact syntax and then paste it in both targets. And then that just magically makes it available in both places. So I currently use that, but you can also have like an underscore shared folder, and any Swift file on that will get linked to the main target. And a lot of that real-time stuff is usually kind of faux. Like you'll set like a timer, and then the timer will just update itself, and then it will like, sometimes check back to see if it's still on track, because it doesn't actually like keep the app open and like ping for resources all the time.
Is this when I do native Swift development? Last question about this. Is it easier when I do native Swift? For example, I have like a workout application, and it shows me like a live activity where I can definitely see like the progress of my like 1 minute or 2 minute pause in the set. Is it also doing like this hacky thing in the back? I imagine there must
Generally,
be something better in
you
Swift.
can see that with like Uber, for example, where it will like sometimes update and then maybe sometimes like bounce back, or it'll be a little bit slow to update in their live activity. But yeah, like you can do whatever you can do natively inside of React Native, especially on the widget side, because that is the explicit like native code. And then if you want to drop down to anything more native, what I do in the live activities demo is I create a custom local module, which then gives me like full access to the underlying native platform.
Yeah.
And so it's only like 1 or 2 functions. And what I found is that you can just prompt like the widget mostly into existence. Prompting works way better with JavaScript and React code on basically every LLM I've tested. But you can kind of get it where I would definitely recommend like copying one of my examples and then prompting around it, saying like, here's what I currently have, rewrite this to do this other thing, so that it remembers, it like knows about the new Swift syntax and like elements that Apple adds, like widget background. But then another pro tip is there is a pre-built template in there, which does not have React Native installed. So what you can do is you do like expo pre-build -- template, and you point to this file, and then it will generate the iOS project, but without React Native. So now you can do like clean builds that are instant because there's no native code in the project, which is like pretty unique to React Native, because if you had like a large app at scale, which is usually where you'd start to build out the widget, now you'll add the widget code and Swift UI playgrounds or whatever previews just stop working when the project gets over a certain complexity size. So with React Native and Expo, you can just reduce your app complexity size to 0, and now you can develop inside of Swift playground previews, whatever they're called, like as if you were starting from scratch. So that if you were to use that template, then you can definitely build the app in like less than half a day, probably in 30. It just depends on how comfortable you are. I could build one in like 30 minutes. I'll probably do it on a stream. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun to give it a try.
It is absolutely, yeah. I have to dive into this. And I think now with the mention of local Expo modules, I think we have mentioned everything possible of Expo. We had Expo Router, DOM components, RSC, EAS, hosting, local modules. So let's wrap it up, because I also got to go for dinner. 2025 at Expo. There are a lot of like ongoing developments. Expo Router will probably, as I heard, we'll see a version 5 anytime this year.
We'll do version 5 with the next SDK version.
And then you do also React 19 in that release?
Potentially. That's up to the React Native team. You can currently use React 19 if you go into Expo and you do like experiments React Canary. And if you turn on server components, that uses React 19.
So what else can we expect in 2025? What will be your focus for the next time?
Yeah, great question. Well, like getting server components done and out is going to be big, and just if I were to guess, like just based on my own dog fooding, what I see in Expo when I'm using all the newest features is it's very easy to go from nothing to JSON loaded from a remote endpoint and on the page. And now I spend like the rest of the day designing how I want that JSON to look and feel and interact. And I'd say that like that becomes the bottleneck is making a very beautiful looking app based on some data inputs. You can obviously build very beautiful apps with React Native today, but I think it could be a lot easier. It could be a lot more opinionated. There could be a lot more, components in there. So to that extent, I think the direction we'd probably go is exposing a lot more Swift UI and Material 3. So you can just say like, here's an array of strings, and then get a component that just looks like a generic styling of an array of strings, and then it looks good on iOS and Android, and presumably like headless or whatever on web. So yeah, I think the UI would be a big part of this. But yeah, a lot of it is just going to be tightening up, like a lot of cleaning things up. So we're still going to be cleaning up new architecture, getting everyone onto React 19, a lot of cleanup work around environment variables, getting those to be flush. So if you just define them once, you know that you can share them with your team and they'll be in all your deployments. And yeah, just getting like more libraries to work, making everything faster. There'll probably be a bit of AI work in here as well. Like we are working with the Bolt.new team right now. We're working with like Replit and the Bolt.new team, so that all of these like online AI code editors can support Expo, and you can generate apps. Another thing that we'll be adding is server functions for DOM components, which is maybe like a third dimension where you can, if you have like modern React code that runs inside of a server function and also does data fetching, you can just take that and put it inside of your app and then switch the server functions between web and native automatically. And all of this really just leads up to a system that is very easy for LLMs to understand, easy for you to like ingest and develop with, and then just deploy wherever you go. But yeah, so I think a lot of good stuff in the works. I'm very excited.
I'm more excited than ever. I released a post earlier this year, or a video, that this year is the time for React Native, and I stand to my word. So I couldn't be more excited about what's coming this year, because I mean, I think I said the same last year, and then you had like API routes, and then we had the first RSC demo. So looks like this year is going to be just as exciting as the last one was, right? Maybe even more.
I hope it's a lot more. I don't know how we're going to top this year, but yeah, we'll see. a lot of really cool room for new libraries, I think.
Yeah, we will definitely see. So to wrap it up, once again, thank you so much. We're going to see if this one will top the last episode. And where should people find, or let's better say, I mean, people will find you on X, of course. Where should people look if they want to follow all the latest updates of Expo and what's going on today?
Yeah, follow Expo on X, just at Expo. I'm on X at Bacon Bricks. And I think we also post like to LinkedIn and other channels, and we're on Discord. But yeah, I primarily just use X, which is great. If you use the new XAI app, you can actually ask it obscure questions like, how does the new MPX create target work? And it will like index my tweets and present a summary based on those tweets, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, I mean, mostly just online. I'm sure if you look, you can find it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will put all the links below the episode, and we'll definitely catch up once RSCs are stable, once we can do even cooler things with Expo in the future. So thank you, Evan, for taking the time, and we'll see you on X soon.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Simon. Take care, guys.
Bye. Thanks for joining today's episode. My goal is to share interesting stories and insights into the world of React Native development. If you enjoy this show, please subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify. And on Spotify and Apple, you can leave up to a 5-star review. Because podcasts, and especially niche podcasts like this, are hard to find, subscribing and leaving a review does help me a lot. On top of that, check out my React Native courses on galaxies.dev that cover a variety of topics from getting started to building and publishing your mobile app. Finally, you can share today's episode with a friend or colleague who would enjoy the topic of the show. If you have any questions or ideas for future episodes, find me on X or leave a comment on YouTube. And last but not least, thank you for listening and happy coding, Simon.